They laughed. My own parents, Mom covering her mouth like it was some inside joke, Dad shaking his head in mock pity. $10? He whispered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. I sat there frozen in a room full of smirks, my face burning, palms trembling. The lawyer had just read my name. That was it. To Dana Harper, $10. No explanation, no apology. Just $10. I wasn't even surprised by the silence that followed. Just the cruel chuckles of family who had always made me feel like an afterthought. But then Mr. Whitaker, the attorney, cleared his throat. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses, there's a private letter, addressed only to Dana. The room fell dead silent. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my parents' eyes. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I. I was born into a family where success was pre-planned before you could walk. The Harpers were not just wealthy, we were legacy. My grandfather built a manufacturing empire from the ground up, and my parents inherited it like royalty. Everything down to the color of our Christmas wrapping paper had rules. From a young age, it was clear I didn't fit. While my older brother Lucas had the poise of a future CEO by middle school, I was the kid hiding in the corner at family parties with a sketchbook. My mother called my paintings cute distractions. My father never looked at them at all. At 13, I saved for months to buy a second-hand camera. I spent weekends taking photos of rusted fences and kids on skateboards, anything that wasn't glossy and fake. When I showed my mom a black and white photo I was proud of, she blinked and said, "You look tired. Maybe less time outside?" By high school, the divide was permanent. Lucas was groomed to be heir. I was tolerated. I remember overhearing my parents once after a board meeting. "She needs to wake up," my dad had said. "Dreams don't pay for legacy." "She's still young," my mother replied half-heartedly. "She'll fall in line eventually." I didn't. Instead, I applied to art school, secretly. When the acceptance letter came in, I told them over dinner. "You want to study photos?" My father blinked, as if the word itself was beneath him. "That's not a profession, Dana. That's a hobby." That was the night my mother said it, the sentence that stayed with me longer than I cared to admit. "You're wasting your inheritance." I moved out 2 months later, scraping by on scholarships, side gigs, and photo shoots for local bands. I learned to edit in a broken-down laptop with dead pixels. I worked nights as a barista. I wasn't chasing fame. I just needed to make something that was mine. The only person who never judged me for it was my grandfather, Walter Harper. He didn't say much, but when I saw him, he always asked, "Taking pictures?" And he'd smile, just a flicker, but real. I thought maybe, just maybe, he saw something in me. When he passed, I didn't expect anything. He hadn't been vocal about favoring me. He was old school, private, but I did expect respect. A photo, maybe. A book, a letter. Something that showed I hadn't been invisible. So when the lawyer read out my name, to Dana Harper, I leave the sum of $10, and the room burst into laughter. I felt my ribs collapse inward. But maybe it wasn't a dismissal. Maybe it was a key. The last time I saw my grandfather alive was 3 weeks before he passed. It wasn't a planned visit. I had just wrapped up a photo shoot downtown and found myself standing in front of his brownstone. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Our family wasn't big on casual drop-ins. But something pulled me there. Maybe intuition, maybe desperation. I rang the bell, expecting no answer. To my surprise, he opened the door himself, thinner than I remembered, slower, but his eyes, still sharp. "Well," he said with a faint smirk, "a Harper who actually knocks." He invited me in without asking why I'd come. His house smelled like cedar and old books. Everything was in its place just like always, the kind of space where time seemed to wait politely by the door. We sat in his study, surrounded by leather chairs and dusty oil paintings of ancestors I'd never met. We didn't talk about the family. Instead, he asked about my photography. "What are you working on now?" he said, pouring tea from a silver pot like he always did. I hesitated. A series called Invisible Homes. I'm photographing abandoned buildings, mostly in neighborhoods being torn down. He looked at me for a long moment. What are you trying to say with them? That people matter, I said. Even if the world forgets them. He gave the smallest nod. That's dangerous work. Why? Because you're telling the truth. And truth always costs more than people think. We sat in silence for a while after that. No small talk, no checking his watch. It was the most present I'd ever felt with someone in my family. As I got up to leave, he followed me to the door and reached into the drawer by the foyer. He pulled out a small, battered film camera older than me, with chipped corners and a worn leather strap. This was mine, he said, placing it in my hands. Before I ever built a company, I carried this everywhere. I was stunned. I didn't know you. Took photos. He didn't respond at first, just looked past me out the window. I stopped, he said, because some dreams don't survive the weight of inheritance. Then he looked at me, really looked. Don't let them take your eye, Dana, he said. That's your gift, and your rebellion. That was the last thing he ever said to me. I stood outside afterward, camera in hand, wondering what he had meant by them. I thought he was warning me about the business. I didn't realize until much later, he was warning me about the family. The will reading took place at a law office in Midtown's sleek glass walls, marble floors, the kind of place where wealth speaks in whispers. I showed up in my best black dress, the one I wore to funerals and gallery openings. I even straightened my hair, just to avoid another comment from my mother about looking unpolished. When I stepped into the conference room, the air turned thick with tension. My parents were already seated near the head of the table, perfectly poised like this was some kind of board meeting. My brother Lucas gave me a nod, tight and empty. My mother didn't even turn her head. My father raised an eyebrow like he'd forgotten I was even in the will. The room filled quickly, cousins, in-laws, aunts, and uncles I hadn't seen in years, all of them with that same eager glint in their eyes. The scent of cologne, leather, and quiet competition hung in the air. Mr. Whitaker, the family lawyer, entered precisely at 10 a.m. with a thick file and a calm face that looked carved from granite. "Thank you all for coming," he said, taking his seat. "We're here to honor the last will and testament of Walter H. Harper." He began with the expected: a vacation home in Vermont to Aunt Lydia, stocks to various cousins, an antique gun collection to Lucas naturally. My mother received a necklace passed down from my grandmother. My father, a portfolio of real estate holdings and a handwritten letter I couldn't read from where I sat. I waited, silent, folding my hands under the table to hide their trembling. Then Whitaker's eyes flicked to me. "To Dana Harper," he said, pausing, "Walter leaves the sum of $10. The room paused just long enough for the words to settle like dust and then erupted. My father let out a loud puff of air, shaking his head. "Guess that's what rebellion gets you," he muttered. My mother actually laughed. A cousin leaned over and whispered, "Must have been one hell of a photograph." I felt the heat rising up my neck. I refused to cry, not here, not in front of them. I swallowed hard and nodded once. "Understood," I said quietly. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the message. I had always known I was different, an outsider in my own bloodline. But hearing my name read like a footnote, hearing my own parents laugh, like I was some kind of joke, that was something else entirely. I wanted to get up and leave. I almost did. But then Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "There is one more thing," he said. And just like that, the room fell silent. Mr. Whitaker looked directly at me, then back down at his folder. "There is a private addendum," he said carefully, "meant only for Dana." That sentence dropped like a stone in the middle of the room. My father frowned. "What do you mean, private?" My mother shifted in her chair. "She already got what she was due," she said flatly, still smug from the $10 announcement. Whitaker didn't flinch. "Mr. Harper left a sealed envelope in my custody. It contains instructions, and it is to be read in private. Dana, would you mind stepping into the adjoining office?" The room buzzed, instantly murmurs, suspicion, Sideways glances. My parents didn't even try to hide their irritation. Lucas looked confused, like he had missed something critical in the family memo. I stood slowly, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. As I followed Mr. Whitaker down the short hallway, I could feel every stare on my back. The air in the smaller room was cooler, quieter. My pulse was deafening. Mr. Whitaker closed the door gently behind us. On the desk in front of me sat a thick envelope, cream-colored, with my name written across the front in delicate cursive. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My grandfather's. "For you," Mr. Whitaker said softly. I picked it up with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. I turned to him. "Did you read it?" He shook his head. "I was instructed not to. But I was told to give you time. Take as long as you need." I nodded, my throat dry. He left the room without another word. I sat down slowly and ran my fingers along the wax seal. It was embossed with a small Symbol tiny camera. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, then cracked it open. There were several pages, all handwritten. The first words made my breath catch. "My dearest Dana." The first paragraph was simple. He apologized for the scene in the main room, said he knew it had hurt, and that it was meant to. "I needed them to show you who they really are when they thought you were powerless." As I kept reading, the world around me fell away. With each line, my grandfather unraveled a secret plan months in the making. The $10 inheritance was a decoy, a shield. He had made arrangements for the true inheritance to bypass the public reading. I was the sole beneficiary of the Harper Foundation. Not the board, not Lucas, not my parents. Me. Along with it came ownership of a private gallery, a penthouse studio, and 70% control of Harper Creative Trust, a holding company with more value than all the property bequeathed at that table combined. And then came the line that would change everything. "They laughed, Dana. But they laughed too soon." I read the letter 3 times before I believed it. My grandfather had orchestrated a transfer of power so elegant, so calculated, it left me stunned. According to the documents attached to the letter, I now controlled the majority stake in the Harper Creative Trust, an investment and philanthropic arm of the family wealth that had been quietly accumulating assets under the radar. While the rest of the family clawed over vacation homes and antique clocks, I held the keys to the true heart of the empire. Not just financial assets. Vision. Legacy. And a choice. Grandpa's letter laid it out clearly. This inheritance came with terms, not change terms. I wasn't expected to become a CEO or sit in boardrooms. I wasn't required to sell my soul to preserve a brand name. But I was asked to stay true to the one thing he believed separated me from the rest of the family: my eye. He wrote, "You see the world, Dana. That's rarer than any asset I've ever held. The trust is yours to shape, but only if you promise not to become them." I laughed through my tears. In a locked drawer at the gallery he had secretly purchased, there was a collection of photographs mine. Every piece I thought had been sold anonymously, every early print I'd let go for pennies. He had bought them under aliases, cataloged them, preserved them like they were priceless. He had been watching me all along. Not judging, not trying to interfere. Just witnessing. It turns out, he never wanted to leave the company to someone who had memorized the rules. He wanted to leave it to someone who could reimagine them. I placed the letter down and looked around the quiet office. The walls were lined with books I had never noticed before: business, philosophy, photography, ethics. He had built this space not for a businessman, but for someone like me. There was a small black box tucked inside the envelope as well. I opened it slowly. Inside was a brass key on a thin leather cord. A handwritten note underneath read, "Beacon Street, top floor. Your new studio, your real inheritance." I stared at the key, overwhelmed. I had come here expecting nothing, maybe a watch, a photograph, a few kind words if I was lucky. Instead, I had been given an entire future. But the craziest part? No one outside that room knew yet. In the conference room down the hall, my parents were still chuckling, still passing judgment, still believing they had watched me get what I deserved. They had no idea. And for now, I decided, I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Let them laugh a little longer. I walked back into the conference room with the letter folded neatly in my purse, my expression unreadable. They were still talking. Guess she'll frame that $10 check, my father snorted. Might be the most valuable thing she ever touches. Laughter. From people who shared my blood. Lucas noticed me first. Everything all right? He asked. Not out of concern, just curiosity. I nodded. Just needed a moment, I replied calmly. I took my seat at the far end of the table again and watched them. Really watched. The way my mother toyed with the chain of her inherited necklace. The way my father leaned back like a man who had won something. The way Lucas scrolled his phone under the table, bored now that the excitement was over. I thought of Grandpa's line. You needed to see them as they are when they think you have nothing. He was right. This was the test. And now, I had to decide how to pass it. Over the next few days, I kept my silence. I didn't return my parents' passive-aggressive texts. I didn't respond when Lucas sent me a screenshot of an online article about generational wealth with a winking emoji. Instead, I met with Mr. Whitaker and began the quiet process of transferring control of the Harper Creative Trust. I visited the Beacon Street penthouse. It was real sunlit, spacious, minimalist. A studio, a gallery, a home, mine. And I spent hours going through the archive my grandfather had left, my photographs, neatly preserved in matte black frames, each with a handwritten tag noting the date and location. Some of the pieces I'd completely forgotten about, but he hadn't. He had named the space the Harper Light Studio. It was like stepping into a parallel timeline where he had followed his dream of photography instead of building an empire. And now, somehow, I was walking the bridge between the two. But I couldn't stop thinking about what came next. What would I do with this power? What would they do when they found out? A part of me wanted revenge, wanted to drop the truth in the middle of their pristine dinner table and watch the color drain from their faces. But another part of me, better part, I think wanted something more lasting. Not just to prove them wrong, to prove me right. To build something from the gift I'd been given that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. That was how I would win. Silently. Fully. Creatively. 6 weeks later, the invitations went out. Elegant, minimal, and impossible to ignore. Harper Light Studio presents The Inheritance of Vision, a debut gallery event celebrating unseen perspectives. It wasn't just a gallery opening, it was a statement. The event was by invitation only, curated critics, art journalists, donors, and yes, my family. I sent theirs by certified mail. I waited. Lucas RSVP'd immediately, probably hoping for exposure. My mother texted a vague, "We'll see." My father said nothing, but I heard through Lucas that they planned to attend curiosity, ego, maybe just a need to supervise. Perfect. Opening night, the studio was glowing. Floor-to-ceiling prints lined the gallery, all mine. The earliest ones were raw, imperfect, my teenage experiments. Then the narrative evolved. Abandoned storefronts, shadows on alley walls, portraits of the overlooked. It was the story of my voice forming through light and silence. But the final room was what I was really waiting for. In the center, a plinth with a framed checked-in crisp dollars behind glass, lit like a masterpiece. Beside it, the plaque. Gifted to Dana Harper at the will reading of Walter H. Harper. Value, priceless. Underneath, a second line. Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test. I timed their arrival perfectly. They entered the main hall mid-speech. A local art critic was speaking about how the collection reflected an artistic legacy of quiet resistance. Cameras clicked. People nodded. I could feel their confusion before they spoke a word. Lucas approached first. "This is all you?" he asked, glancing at a wall of black and white portraits. "Yes." His brow furrowed. "Since when do you run this place?" I smiled. "Since always." My mother stepped forward. She wore pearls, and that pinched expression she used at fundraisers. "Dana," she said, clearly trying to sound gracious, "this is quite ambitious. Did someone sponsor this?" My voice stayed calm. No sponsors, just one believer. My father joined her, looking around with narrowed eyes. "Where did you get the money for all this?" I tilted my head. "That's not really the question you want to ask, is it?" He said nothing. Just then, Mr. Whitaker appeared beside me. He was holding a champagne flute and wearing a rare smile. "Shall we?" he asked. I nodded. We stepped to the small platform near the $10 exhibit. The room quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitaker began, "thank you for joining us tonight at Harper Light Studio, founded by and dedicated to the artistic vision of Dana Harper." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras lifted. "It's also time we share a piece of the story many of you have not heard. As executor of Walter Harper's private estate, I'm honored to announce that Dana Harper is not only the founder of this studio, but also the sole beneficiary of the Harper Creative Trust." Gasps. Audible. I watched the color drain from my mother's face. Lucas blinked like he'd misheard. My father took half a step forward, then stopped. Whitaker continued. "Mr. Harper believed that legacy should follow merit, not lineage. Dana's unwavering pursuit of creative truth, despite rejection and resistance, earned her not only his admiration but his full support." He raised his glass. "To Dana Harper, the real heir." The applause was instant and thunderous, but I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at them. My mother's lips were tight with disbelief. My father's fists clenched at his sides. Lucas looked stunned, unsure whether to be angry or impressed. I stepped down from the platform, walking straight toward them. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother hissed. "Because you didn't ask," I said evenly. "You never asked what I was building. You only asked why I didn't fall in line." "We're still your family," she said. "And yet, you laughed when I was humiliated," I replied. "That $10? You thought it was the full measure of my worth. And this?" My father gestured around the gallery. "This was all some plan? A setup?" "No," I said. "It was a mirror. You just didn't like what you saw." They said nothing. Because what could they say? I left them standing there and returned to the crowd, people who were curious, engaged, maybe even proud. People who saw me not as a failure, but as a creator. And in that moment, surrounded by my work, my grandfather's faith, and the truth made visible, I finally felt like I had inherited something far greater than money. I had inherited the power to define myself. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at the penthouse my grandfather left me. After the gallery emptied and the buzz faded, I stood alone in the top-floor studio, barefoot on hardwood, surrounded by my own photographs. Outside the windows, the city pulsed with quiet light, but inside, it was still, reverent. On the desk sat the $10 check, no longer tucked away in shame. I'd reframed it after the show, placing it beside a photograph of my grandfather looking out a train window, the same one I'd taken years ago when no one else noticed him quietly watching the world pass by. It wasn't just inheritance. It was a reminder. He hadn't left me money to save me. He left it to free me. In the weeks that followed, I finalized plans to expand the Harper Light Studio into a residency program for young artists from underserved communities. I converted one floor of the building into live work studios, complete with supplies, equipment, and mentorship opportunities. The first round of artists arrived timid, just like I once was, but with the same hunger in their eyes. The Harper Creative Trust, now under my guidance, began funding grants for emerging photographers and visual storytellers, especially those pushed to the margins. At the first board meeting, I wore black jeans, boots, and no apology. The other trustees looked stunned until I presented a 3-year plan that balanced profit and philanthropy with razor-sharp strategy. Grandpa had made sure I'd have the right advisors, and I had learned fast. Lucas never showed up to the gallery again. My parents stopped calling. And that was okay. Not out of bitterness but clarity. Some relationships are roots, others are weights. A few months later, A young artist in our residency knocked on my office door. She held a worn camera in her hand, her eyes bright but unsure. "Do you ever worry," she asked, "that people will only see your money, not your work?" I smiled gently. "All the time, but it only matters if I believe it. If you lead with your vision, the rest follows." She nodded slowly, like she was filing it away for a future moment of doubt. So was I. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's passing, Mr. Whitaker delivered a final letter. Just a few lines. "Wealth is not what you hold, but what you choose to build. You were always the legacy I believed in, Dana. You just had to believe it too." That night, I lit a candle in the gallery and left the doors unlocked. A few strangers wandered in, some students, some tourists. They stood in front of the $10 check, whispering, wondering. They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. Because my legacy didn't need explanation. It just needed to be lived.